In my work, I like to play around a lot with dream logic. And by that, I mean things make a weird sort of sense within a dream. Physics and time don't work the same way that they would in waking life. And objects and people and scenarios that have absolutely nothing to do with each other will blend and merge almost seamlessly within a dream. But most of all, I love how strong the emotions and the moods are within a dream, and sometimes it'll stay with you throughout your entire day. So in my work as an editorial illustrator, I have to find visual connections between disparate things all the time. I have to play with scale, with point of view, and with mood, all to tell a story. So in my personal work, I like to apply those same practices in order to explore things that I feel passionate about and work through my own emotions. Instead of just documenting or telling the story of a particular dream, I'm instead looking for its essence, the feelings that I experienced during that dream. Sometimes it's really eerie, sometimes it's this sense of uncanniness, other times it's light and buoyant. But I try and find connections between objects and find these shapes that will visually recreate that same kind of feeling within me. For instance, my coral octopus was an idea that came out of this feeling of heaviness of water pressing down on me, and it gave a sense of foreboding that danger was lurking somewhere out of sight and I couldn't escape because of all this pressure. And Adrift and Weathered came from feelings of being lost, from just going with the flow and not actually doing anything with my life. I felt like I was fading out and being carried away, all the while longing for something I couldn't express, something intangible. In this ocean biome, I never actually depict the water itself. Instead, I'm showing how the inhabitants interact with it and how they're shaped by it. The pieces in this room are generally expressions of emotions I was processing at the time I created each piece. Sometimes there's a sense of whimsy and a sort of longing for these environments that don't actually exist. I like to create these little snippets of sentient worlds, and I like to let the viewer interpret it and imagine what kind of place would allow such beings to exist. But I also deal with a lot of my darker feelings through artwork too. For instance, bones have always signified a sort of deepness to me. They're at the very center and the very core of you. They provide your body with strength and structure, but they're also the part of your body furthest from the light. When I'm drawn to depicting bones, it's usually because I'm dealing with feelings that I don't want to feel, things I don't want to admit, regrets I have, or just a general sense of impermanence or loss or wasting time, wasting my life. When I created Fissure and Shatter, I was dealing with some uncomfortable emotions at the time, and I didn't quite know how to process them or work through them. And I just had this image in my head of a skull being pushed apart by toxic plants, the same way that plants will push up through concrete and break it apart. So these pieces explore the idea of what is allowed to take root inside of you, what is allowed to grow there, and in turn, how does that affect the structure of you? How does that affect you as a whole? My bird series started as just a way for me to practice my style. I wanted something that didn't require too much thought and was there whenever I needed to work on something in my process and just develop new techniques. My parents keep a running list of all the birds that they see in their backyard, and for this project I just started working through all the birds on that list. Ironically, this is what I became most known for in my personal work is the bird series. In the beginning, I was just trying to accurately depict each bird I was drawing, and I was referencing a lot of scientific illustrations of animals and old natural history illustrations. But one thing I noticed about them is that they always use dead specimens as reference, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a really great way to get to know the anatomy of an animal. But it's obvious in the postures and the illustrations that they're not quite natural, they're not quite lively, and they're not the way that a bird would express itself in nature. I have always associated birds with a lot of energy and life and also fragility, and I wanted to accurately depict a bird, but I wanted to show it as its most alive and active state. I wanted to capture a little bit of the energy and personality that I've noticed in each of the different species. For instance, red-winged blackbirds are extremely bold, they're in your face, they're super noisy, and they have the most hilarious attitude. And if you compare that to a mourning dove, which is quite timid and shy and will have this hilarious look of alarm on its face if you get too close, they each have their own distinct personality, and I wanted to make sure a little bit of that comes across in each drawing. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the tree in the center of this space, because it's a really good example of the collaborative effort of this exhibition. Some of the leaves are actually feathers, which I drew specifically for this space. You probably guessed that I dreamed about birds a lot, but really only birds that I've had as pets. So the feather that I depicted here is actually from one of my beloved pet birds that's passed away years ago, and she's still a frequent visitor in my dreams, so I thought that was a nice little addition to the space. I take a lot of inspiration from the way completely disparate things can mesh together so seamlessly within a dream, and I try to apply that same kind of thinking in my work. I'm always looking for objects or things in nature that share similar qualities. So that could be the way they move, or the way they behave, or even the feeling that they evoke. For instance, in my piece called Spore, I was visualizing toxic thoughts by depicting them as mushrooms. I was thinking about how mushrooms seem to just pop out of nowhere and grow extremely quickly and spread very quickly. They can also be nourishing or extremely toxic. And I was comparing this to the way that your thoughts can seemingly just erupt out of nowhere, completely unbidden. And if you ruminate on them, they can grow to cloud your thinking and the way that you see the world, and they can even spread from within yourself to infect others. And I took this concept a little bit further when I was working on the Sentinel. I was really intrigued by the idea that thoughts and human experience seem to mimic the way that plants grow or the way that nature behaves. And I came up with this idea of this sort of hybrid spirit that was a watcher of the forest and a caretaker and an eerie observer. I wanted the viewer to feel a little bit uncomfortable. I wanted them to feel like it was familiar, but it was something they felt like they weren't supposed to see. And in general, this has been my approach to creative portraiture. I like finding these little pieces of human experience that I can visualize through nature imagery.